Welcome everyone to our session in the Lifelong Learning Week. My name is Moritz Borchardt. I was the project manager of a project called the Unsung Hero Dialogues, where Katja Griesen and many others did our survey on the economic situation of civil society workers in Europe. And we're here to discuss our findings in a way and discuss the gender situation of civil society, I think implicitly and explicitly in Europe right now. And we're very happy to have some great experts with us today. We have Ona Aitken with us, we have Seamus Boland with us, and we have Alexandrina Naimovic, if I pronounced everything correctly. And yeah, I think for us, this has been quite a long process for a better part of 2 years. And we have some interesting findings and hopefully some interesting discussions that we don't just want to do like among, let's say, the all of us, but we'll also open it to broader discussion. And yeah, I think with that, I'll hand over to Katja and the results.
That's nice to see everyone. Good morning to everybody. Let me just open up my screen. So we're going to start off with a presentation of our results from the project and talk a little bit about our data collection process and what we found and kind of open questions moving forward before we head into discussion with you all and with our experts that we have invited. So as Moritz mentioned, we worked on this as a collective project between several different partner organizations. I am representing today the DARE network, the Democracy and Human Rights Education in Europe network. And my colleagues and I, Georg Pirker, Elisa Repetti, kind of focused during the project on the survey and then also qualitative data collection. So today, as I mentioned, I just want to kind of talk about the data collection process, what we found in the surveys and interviews that we did, and then highlighting kind of open questions that we see left to be explored and maybe we can kind of dig into a bit today. So in terms of our process, we kicked off with a quantitative survey, which really sought to just gain a better understanding of the labor situation among civil society workers in Europe. So this was offered in the native languages of all of the partner countries, as well as in English. And we collected data across a full year and had roughly over 500 responses to that survey. So obviously not representative, but we think it gave us some good insights into what people are experiencing amid the sector. As a follow-up to that, and to really kind of get a more nuanced perspective about the data that we collected and kind of talk to experts and practitioners in the field, we set up qualitative interviews with experts and practitioners. And because our survey collection really kind of cast a wide net in terms of a variety of different subsectors within CSO work, we also wanted to do that with our expert interviews. So we pulled people from labor unions, academia, EU level CSOs, local level, and hope to get kind of a broader understanding and a little bit more nuance on the quantitative data. And that happened actually this year between April and August 2021. So to make sure that you all are awake already and with us, and also to just kind of see who we have in the room with us today, we wanted to do a quick Slido poll. This is one of the questions that we had in our survey and was kind of kicked it off. And so what you can do is go to slido.com in your browser. You can also use the Slido app if you have that, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen. And then it'll ask you just for the code 937297, and that will enable you to participate. And what we wanted to know today to kick us off is, in what sector does your primary employment or organization work? So the options: nonprofit organization, public institution or governmental body, or social enterprise, or other. And I'll give you all just a minute to start filling those in. Okay, so it's looking like a vast majority are in the nonprofit organization category, few in the public institution government body. Give folks another minute to just submit a response. We're inching upwards on nonprofits. Okay, it looks like we're tapering off. So this is actually quite in line with what we found in our survey as well, which is that 78% of those that responded were affiliated with nonprofit organizations. I think the second category was also public institutions, and then just a handful that represented social enterprise. We also found that the folks that responded were pretty distributed in age across life cycle. The majority were women with 57%, although we had some that were also no responses, so it could be a bit higher than that, and that's kind of consistent with what we find in terms of feminization of the sector. And then we also found, interestingly, that 55% were located in urban areas, and that included cities and megacities, and only 6% were in rural regions, which I think is also kind of consistent with what we know about CSOs in rural areas being less represented. The number of countries we had represented were 30, and that included a handful of countries that were actually outside of the EU, so a little bit beyond what we originally anticipated collecting. And the majority were from our UHD partner countries, so Portugal, Estonia, Italy, Greece, and Germany. And that makes sense given that those were also the languages that the survey was in and the networks that were that the survey was mostly distributed through, although we did have a lot of support also from other networking organizations, for example, LLLP. And then last, on the demographic standpoint, the level of education of CSO workers that responded to the survey was quite high. So a majority had a tertiary degree, with many with a master's or PhD level. So I think that also raises questions for, maybe how in touch people are with the communities that they serve, but also in terms of what kind of qualifications it takes to actually work in the sector. So coming back to Slido, we wanted to, before we head into the section on working conditions, give you all the chance to just answer one of the questions that we asked of our respondents. So I'll switch us back over here. And it should be the same Slido code link and QR code asking, do you work during the weekend or public holidays? And options are often, once a month, sometimes, which means less than once a month, always, or never. And thanks to those of you who've already started to fill those in. Okay, so the majority definitely with sometimes, less than once a month, often. Well, another second to fill that in. Okay, so yeah, so I mean, again, this is actually quite consistent with what we found as well. It looks like some of you have never, some always work on public holidays and weekends, several of you often, but the majority, as we found, at least sometimes work on those holidays. And that's something that we wanted to assess because we're looking at also work-life balance in the field. Another question that we asked as part of the survey was whether work negatively impacts other areas of life. And 34% of respondents indicated that yes, work negatively impacts other areas of their life at least some of the time. So as today we're talking about kind of well-being of workers in the field, I think those are important statistics to highlight. We also wanted to touch on insecurity and job security. So what you can see here in the results is that 33% and 33%, so a dead heat here, even felt at least to some extent insecure and to some extent secure in their job. And we left that quite broad in the question formulation. But when we dug in a bit more and looking at that with other variables, I think that's where it got kind of interesting. So for example, we did a cross-section of feelings of job insecurity by age, and we actually found that there's no correlation between that. So people who are younger and people who are older were equally as secure or insecure, which was kind of surprising, I think, as we might have expected younger people to feel less secure at the beginning of their careers. And then kind of, it stands to reason, but we also looked at this in terms of the type of funding that the respondents' position was based on. So those who were in project positions that were based around project funding were less insecure than those who had positions that were longer term and steadier, which I think, again, stands to reason, but is an important point to highlight, especially in regard to civil society work. And then we also wanted to look in terms of working conditions at economic recognition of the work. So as you can see here, 39% of respondents did not think that their income reflects the value of the impact of their work for society. And then even maybe more alarming, a full 48%, so almost half of those that responded reported that their income did not or barely covered living expenses. So that's kind of a more less subjective response as well, showing kind of economic precariousness of workers in the field. And I think it also points, maybe several of these point also to this element of kind of the idea that civil society work has a voluntary nature to it. So perhaps professionals even justify the lack of job security or economic recognition because of the kind of social utility that the work provides, or a feeling of fulfillment because of the cause orientation of the work that may lead to self-exploitation that results in perhaps less work-life balance, less economic stability. So kind of picking up on that a bit, we talked just a minute ago about the precariousness of working in the field, particularly when you look at project-based funding, for example. So we also found that funding came up over and over again in conversations with our experts during the interviews, but it also impacted other areas aside from precariousness. One was the competition for resources that kind of inhibits collaboration across and between civil society actors. That also maybe not even necessarily related to the mission of the work, but also to the social capital that the field as a whole may be able to garner if they were better able to collaborate and there was less competition for resources. Similarly, impact orientation came up over and over again, in that it's become really a constant focus that people are having to look at these more short-term goals and measure based on kind of market-based variables, monetized elements, rather than perhaps longer-term measures of efficacy and effect. And then it can also kind of inhibit the strategic thinking of civil society, measures that may be less economically important in the short term. And then another factor was, of course, this element of the service versus advocacy focus of civil society work. And we questioned, and this came up in several interviews, is the element of state funding. So because such a large extent of civil society funding is provided by the state, does that actually inhibit the advocacy or political role that civil society organizations can play? And in terms of advocating for their own mission, but also for their labor rights as a sector. And then we also gauged just 2 points here on satisfaction, because I think it's interesting too, after hearing about kind of the economic precariousness, maybe less work-life balance, it's also important to note that there is, at least based on our survey results, quite a high degree of satisfaction with the work. So 55% reported being at least somewhat satisfied, and 61% could envision themselves working in their current field throughout their career. So clearly, you know, we can't kind of deduce why exactly that satisfaction exists when we also saw these maybe more other factors that indicate the work may be kind of more difficult or more trying at times. But I think it's interesting to note, and we can discuss that perhaps further later. And then one other key element that came up over and over again was this tension between professionalization of the civil society sector and the balance of that with its more voluntary nature. And I kind of touched on that a bit before, but I think it's important to note too that, you know, professionalization as a term is itself kind of ambiguous. So on the one hand, it has to do with an improvement of status and recognition of the social value, which I think we might be able to agree is indeed an aim and important for the work. But on the other hand, it's also concerned with improvement of capacity enhancement and increased quality of the work that's being conducted. And I think that, you know, certainly too, those come with kind of positives and negatives. So increased professionalization tends to mean greater economic recognition of the work, recognition as an important actor in society and communication with other sectors, international networks, increased training opportunities. But it certainly also maybe decreases some of the characteristics affiliated with its more voluntary nature, which is, you know, responsiveness to community needs, self-determination, a freedom to critique that may not exist as much when the work is more professionalized. So I think, you know, this is certainly open to debate and conversation, but it's really about finding a balance between those two features and not merging them with other sectors, not equating it with the corporate sectors or with the public sector, but finding a way to couple these unique characteristics of voluntariness with professionalization moving forward. So last interactive question, but we wanted to kind of gauge also in our survey openness to organizing for civil society workers' rights at the European level. And so we had several questions that I'll look to in a moment, but it would be great too to get your take on this and your response and see what opinions we have in the room. So the question, would you support organizations that lobby for civil society workers' rights at the European level? Yes, I already do. Yes, but I don't currently. No, or maybe. Some movement there. It's good no one said no yet, but feel free to if you. Okay, so I think that makes sense too. You know, we're in a room with people working in this sector that we're seeing the majority, 56%, yes, I already do, and then 44% of you saying yes, but I don't currently. Which is slightly different than what we saw turning back to our survey results, where we saw that 45% of respondents were actually unaware of labor rights initiatives at the EU level, and 20% said they didn't know. So kind of a matter of just awareness of what work is already happening, but also the possibilities. 13%, so a really low number, reporting that they already belong to a labor union at the national level. And then I think, you know, those kind of lower, what we're seeing in terms of a lower awareness or a lower current involvement in that movement in advocating for workers' rights was kind of positively offset by a willingness to support labor rights initiatives, although only 8% of those that responded are already doing that at the EU level, and 23% maybe would. So a vast majority of people saying, yes, I am open to that, which I think is encouraging for all of us here. So just to leave us, before we head into discussion, on these questions and more, and we want to hear from you too on things that we maybe left out or elements that are important for us to consider moving forward. But we had a few questions that maybe we can all start to think about together. On the one hand, obviously, we, like I said, cast a very large net. We open this to civil society at large, which encompasses a huge variety of subsectors within that. So I think that's an outstanding question, is how you can further explore civil society as a sector as a whole, but also recognize kind of the nuanced, unique characteristics of each of its subsectors and how you may be able to organize that across those. And then two, I think it's, again, looking at funding structures. It just comes up over and over again, but how can we design funding structures that promote stability, collaboration, and healthy work conditions for civil society workers? And then also this question of whether public funding is leading to the de-emphasis on advocacy work and the role of CSO organizations as political actors. And if so, how do we kind of balance that out? And then lastly, the question of volunteerism versus professionalization. I think it's questioning, whether this glorification of volunteering in the sector maybe compromises effectiveness or creates damaging expectations of self-sacrifice. So this self-exploitation element that maybe also limits individual workers' motive to advocate for their own rights as workers. And then how can civil society bring volunteers and professional staff together in a way that uniquely benefits the organizations, but also each of these two different groups? And lastly, on the advocacy piece, how connected are local CSOs who may be less professionalized as it stands or be more reliant on volunteers? How are those realities, concerns, challenges networked with national CSOs and Brussels-based organizations, and what are mechanisms that we can introduce to kind of bridge those gaps? So that was just kind of some top highlights. We'll put a link to in the chat to more information about the survey and the project, but we're also happy to talk on our end at DARE, and I know Moritz is as well. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Moritz, to start us on our discussion.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, and with that, I think I would just hand it down the line, essentially, and maybe ask our panel to introduce themselves and just for some first reactions. And just by virtue of the order in which I have you in my screen, I would say we can start with Ona. Just a brief introduction and first reactions to what you just witnessed.
Thank you very much. So first of all, congratulations to the team that put this report together. I think it's a really comprehensive piece of work. It raises all the issues that anybody who's working in the civil society sector would raise. So just quickly a bit about me. So I'm a relatively recently retired charity chief executive of a large national charity in the UK, but also I've been very active in the European level with lots of different European projects, so plenty of experience of different European countries and how civil society works within them. I'm currently on the steering committee of the Lifelong Learning Platform, on the board of European Civic Forum, Sasha, and also president of Volunteer Europe, which is the European and beyond network of organisations that deploy volunteers across Europe and beyond. So just one or two comments from having read the report and listened to your great presentation, Katja. I think that there are just so many things. I don't want to take up lots and lots of time. Let me just talk a bit about the employment situation. So you're absolutely right. High qualifications, low salaries, it's a problem everywhere. Precariousness, lack of promotion, linking back to lack of opportunities for training and development. Although I have to say, for the last 3 years, I've been involved in the UK with a master's degree in voluntary sector management which is run by City University in London, which is a huge opportunity for people who work in the voluntary sector to get a master's degree in that very topic, talking about and writing about managing both professional staff and volunteers. And that was a great experience for me, being a co-teacher in that course. So there are some opportunities, but they're not very widespread, as you've said in your report. Majority of female employees, but mostly men in managerial positions. I'm not sure I can say that for across the EU, but I can certainly say it for the UK. It's very, very striking when you meet when a group of chief executives meet in the UK. The vast majority of them are men, but the staff are largely female. And we really need to do something to address that balance. And again, I mean, I can only speak from my experience in the UK, but the Association of Chief Execs in the UK, Voluntary Sector Chief Execs in the UK, is doing a lot of work to promote the promotion of women and to give women confidence to be promoted within the sector. Just quickly on funding, the biggest issue that you've raised there is the problem between what we call in the UK restricted and unrestricted funding. So restricted funding being the stuff you get from contracts, local authorities, all of that sort of thing, and unrestricted, very, very little of it around at the European level as well. Although I have to say the People's Postcode Lottery, which is actually a European organisation, provide unrestricted funding for organisations across in those countries of the European Union that they operate. And it's a fabulous organisation, because to have unrestricted funding of say $500,000 in an organisation that turns over say 10 million, it's absolutely brilliant. So that's a key thing. How we resolve that, I don't know, it's a member states issue, isn't it? Because it's about government funding and whether governments are prepared in their departments to give unrestricted funding to civil society organisations, a very, very difficult one. I was very interested reading the report, the impact of COVID and this surge of volunteering around COVID, people looking for opportunities to be complementary to the emergency services and so on. Looking after vulnerable people in communities, and everybody clapping and all the rest of it. But then, you know, as the pandemic, well, you can't really say it's going back now because it's surged again, but then it's all forgotten, and you know, we don't keep up that momentum in terms of volunteering. And very disappointing to see that civil society organisations are literally nowhere in the recovery and resilience plans. And my last point would really be about this business, the issue that you've raised around professionals and volunteers. I ran an organisation that had about 120 professional staff and probably about 30,000 volunteers across the UK. Now, the tension between the professional staff and the volunteers was sometimes palpable, and we had lots of strategies to try and understand what was going on, but also to provide people with the tools to manage both professional staff and volunteers. In a sense, we were lucky because a lot of our volunteering, in fact, most of our volunteering was very structured volunteering. So the volunteers had to be prepared to make, one, a long-term commitment, and two, a commitment to training around the role they were going to play, because it was pretty much 100% with vulnerable young people, vulnerable children, vulnerable families, and vulnerable elderly people. So you can't just, you know, rock up and do your volunteering in that context. You have to have some kind of training, especially in things like safeguarding. So once you've kind of got that through to the people that came forward to volunteer, they understood that, and the tension was less in these situations. But it is a big issue. People are very much have the cause at heart, and sometimes for both volunteers and professional staff, that cause actually prevents them from doing the job that they should be doing. That's quite a controversial thing to say, but I say it from experience. You know, we absolutely have to have things like impact evaluation, measurement. We're spending public money. We have to be able to account for that money. So there has to be that element of professionalisation with the volunteering and the cause sitting side by side. So just some really opening remarks about the points that you raised in the report. But again, congratulations. I thought it was a great report. I wish I'd had it while I was still a chief executive. It would have been a very useful tool, especially to talk to the government about in the UK. So thanks very much. I won't take up any more time, but happy to join the discussion later. I hope you understand my English. Perhaps sometimes.
Right. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll lead right over to Alexandrina.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll...
Hello. I'm Alexandrina Naimovic, Secretary General of the European Civic Forum, which is a pan-European network of more than 100 associations all across Europe. We mainly work at the network level, at the European level with staff. Some of our member organizations engage with volunteers, and actually our elected representatives are all on a voluntary base. So this is, I think, the experience of all European networks that need to manage staff teams at the Secretariat, at the Transnational Secretariat, that need to articulate the work and the strategy and mission and purpose work that is defined by elected representatives of boards of directors and other steering committees. Yeah, I second Una saying that it's really a very interesting study, and I think it resonates with our own experience of each of us in the room. That probably when we decided to, probably it was a conscious decision to work in the not-for-profit environment and to look for a job that makes sense, implying most of the time that that job will not necessarily make big money. And I'm not saying that it should be like this, but I think it's really quite a given inside civil society and not-for-profit environments, even when we choose that direction, that the mission is more important than the economic reward that we get for our work. Maybe as first reactions, I would just add a few things from maybe slightly different perspectives, and then probably in the second round, we will come more concretely to the questions that you left for the discussion. In terms of precarity of funding, I think, again, that this is something that we all observe in our environments, also shifting of funding models that sometimes go hand in hand with an attitude of public authorities in shifting their own funding more towards services than to advocacy. This is something that we observe for years and for years. Maybe it became more evident starting with the economic crisis. Back in 2008, oops, sorry, my architecture with the webcam is fragile. And it's an unfolding phenomenon. So more and more civil society through voluntary and professional work is expected to fill some gaps that are left by public policy. So sometimes we are really replacing the role of the state with all the consequences that can have on our mission, on staff, and also on our capacities to do advocacy. So really, this deserves, I think, an entire reflection. This reflection we also put in the context of analyzing the evolutions of the civic space in general in Europe, and the threats and the challenges and the shifting perspectives that we observe, not only in terms of funding, but in general in terms of relations between civil society and governments, and civil society and also non-state actors. But I will come back to this aspect maybe a little bit later. Just maybe about a few inner motivational aspects that are both individual but also organizational, and that sometimes bring us workers and volunteers in the not-for-profit and activist sector, bring us in burnout situations. Which even I think we have the tendency to consider normal, and this is something that is really worrying me. Maybe first of all, the fact that well, saving the world is something that is a very big mission that we have, and probably from the outset we are in that kind of modus operandi to have unrealistic expectations on our capacities, and then to give unrealistic, to give funders, donors, and all those that work with us also quite unrealistic expectations of what we do. Usually civil society can do more with less, and we've been given and rewarded this kind of appreciation quite often in our work. Just to say, the motto that sometimes we have on our desk is that the urgent has been done, the impossible is ongoing, and for miracles, please hold on. I think that this describes very well the mindset of those that are working inside civil society. So it comes a lot to an issue of responsibility, which then involves also an issue of guilt, because when you work with vulnerable people, when you need to save the world, when you need to define the rights, you take it personal at some. It's very difficult, including for staff members and for leadership of organizations, to bridge and to balance between what realistically we can do, what is our mission, and how can we stretch beyond all the time beyond our mission and capacities. And this is the tendency to stretch beyond. Because of the high expectations that we have, and the scale also, the enormity of the problems that we have to face and to solve, which then puts us also in the situation, I guess, to have no boundaries and to be also in the impossibility to say no. I don't know how many of you are confronted with the fact that the more successful you are in a campaign, in a mission, the more traction you get, the more partnership you've been proposed, the more visibility to get, the more and more difficult is to say no to new partnerships and new activities that will not help you get out of the burning out situation in which you are. And of course, ultimately also, it relates to an analysis of the macro situation or the systemic situation that we are able to do. And then also to involve our staff and our volunteers in appreciating the power relations in the society, the room for maneuver that our campaigning and advocacy activities can have, and finally to measure the impact against all these power relations and concrete objective situations that we are facing. And as Una said, I think that it is very much a matter of difficulty to measure the impact of our activities, that we tend to do more and more in quantitative terms, having the feeling that in this way we will be more effective in ultimately saving the world. And just to end maybe on some threats that, to add on to the list of threats, some threats that are more maybe coming from outside the sector, coming from, as I said, we put them in this whole situation of the shrinking civic space. These threats come from local, national power authorities, governments, and they also put us in the situation, in the best case, as I said, there's a shifting of funding, also a shifting of mission, because more and more organizations that do campaigning are considered to be political, and this role of being political actors is more and more denied by public authorities. So and in the best case, as I said, there would be a shifting of funding, but in the worst case, there would be smear campaign, harassment, and other kinds of activities that would stop organizations from being political. In that sense, I would just like to make a short break here to say that we have on the table currently an initiative at the European level that is deemed to respond to this whole situation. It is a proposal by an MEP, Sergei Lagodinsky, to work on harmonizing standards of what do we mean by civil society, what would be a minimum enabling conditions for civil society to operate at the national level. So there is a proposal for a directive that is currently in discussion internally in the European Parliament that would pose also these restate these very basic principles that are codified in international and European law. But now they will be posed in a directive to say that organizations should be free to fundraise whenever and wherever they want, and that their activities by definition are political, because we are actors that want to have a say on the way that we develop our societies and the values and the rights that should be at the core. of our society. So the list is very long of threats that we are facing as organizations, as individual activists, also going beyond volunteering or thinking volunteering in terms of activism, street activism, social and civic movements. Also here, I think there's a great risk of burnout and a great risk and vulnerability of activists that are threatened not only by state authorities, also by heavy-handed policing, more and more convictions, etc., but also by non-state actors through what we call SLAPs, the strategic lawsuits against public participation, that usually are performed by private actors that feel threatened by the advocacy of civic activists. And also other kinds of threats that are coming from fascist groups, far-right identitarians that more and more become vocal and are not being handled by the same kind of heavy-handed policing that we see our national authorities handling social discontent. Sometimes we have the feeling they are even left or being used to silence progressive activism, especially in terms of solidarity with a lot of vulnerable groups like migrants. So I think that in the face of all these challenges, we really need to join forces. And I saw that the project, one of the objectives of the project is also to create some kind of alliance at the European level between organizations to work on these issues and to try to find together solutions, both organizational, but maybe also in more macro terms, how can we strategize to overturn these very worrying threats that we are facing also from outside of our own work. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, like we'll pick all of this up in a hot second, but yeah, for now I'd like to give the word to Seamus.
Good morning. Thank you very much for allowing and inviting me to speak. Just to introduce myself, I'm president of Grouptree Diversity Europe, which, as you may know, is one of the 3 groups that make up the European Economic Social Committee. And I suppose my group in Grouptree very much represent what you would call or are comprised of civil society organizations across a wide spectrum, from environmental to rights to farming to youth to older people, and all of the various spectrum that many civil society groups. From an Irish perspective, I work in a rural organization. So Katja, you will be glad to know that at least one of us exists in the very low return in the poll, but we are quite a busy rural voluntary organization in Ireland, and very much in the civic society mode, because we would have been extremely busy during, and still are, during the whole COVID problem. And that really has in one sense energized us, but has also shown up some of the issues arising in your survey. And also I am really in agreement strongly with Una and Alexandrina, who of course, Alexandrina, we've worked together recently in a forum organized on the 5th of November. But Una, I have to say, many years ago when I looked younger, we ended up, a few of us, studying what we believe to be, and in a certain sense was a very superior system in Britain. But of course, we learned from the British, and especially the voluntary and the community and the civil society organizations, that they, as you've just outlined, had many issues as well. But at least you had something we hadn't got in Ireland, especially. There was some diversity of funding available through trusts and other independent entities, which allowed organizations, especially in the kind of campaigning and advocating in the minority situations, to at least get funding which wasn't threatened the next day by a government who decided they didn't like what you were studying or what you were at. And unfortunately in Ireland we have that situation. And I have stuff here that I was going to say, which I will, but I am picking up. I mean, Alexandrina, you put it so well. I mean, in terms of the whole of this problem really started in 2008 when the whole financial crisis hit, and effectively the civil society sector, especially the ones doing the lesser popular activities, found themselves losing the funding almost immediately, and that's what happened to my own organization. For example, Irish Rural Link would do a lot of work in minority situations in rural, like the LGBT area, like migrants, areas that don't gather a lot of funding and certainly are not seen as popular. And in fact, you would have political pressure on us not to be doing, as indeed we got. We even got, I think we did a migration report and we ended up getting death threats on the subject. So that'll give you an idea of the kind of atmosphere that's out there. So when we look at civil society, and this is the point I want to add to this discussion, if you look at the Conference of the Future of Europe, civil society organizations are certainly, there's been a major attempt, in my opinion, to exclude us or to leave us offside, making our contribution really difficult to organize and manage. Now, I'm not totally depressed about that, but I stated and demonstrated as an example of the reality in terms of civil society. We do suffer a great deal from government and governments and even EU Commission mistrust. It's great if you're Greenpeace or if you're the massive NGO type organizations who don't care who threatens them, because they're large, they're funded massively by independent entities who pretty much allow them to be unrestricted in terms of their activities. But if you're in the smaller variety, and I'm not even talking about tiny, I'm talking about, national sized organizations, you're advocating for rights, for migration rights, people on low pay, people who are discriminated because of gender, color, racial, you will find yourself struggling to get the funding. And that is a major weakness in the way civil society is funded. And as a result, even the best of the organizations, Katja, as your survey is finding, are frankly poorly paid. And there is even a feeling, and a strong feeling, that we shouldn't be paid at all. And that organizations, unless they're totally voluntary, are somehow to be feared and should actually not receive taxpayers' money, because as far as the leading political authorities of the day are concerned, we're abusing the taxpayers' money because, of course, we're not praising them. And that's a major problem. So that the Conference of the Future of Europe, the thing that will eventually work itself out there, in my opinion, is that when the citizens' panels go home, the civil society organizations, will end up having to pick up the pieces and effectively implement a lot of the recommendations. So I'm not as totally pessimistic about the Conference of the Future of Europe as some civil society organizations are. I suppose the second thing in terms of what we can do, and I think Alexandrina, and we've had discussions about this, we need to look at how we manage and what messages we, as in the way we do our business, send out to the Commission, to European member states, to everybody. And it is, why are we not a recognized social partner? I mean, it's a real question to ask. And I usually, even in the wider EESC committee, when I ask that question, you straight away get defensive answers, especially from the unions and the employers, because they do like that club that they're in, two social partners negotiating with whoever, the government, commission, wherever. And I really believe, and it's irrelevant whether you come from the EESC of Grouptree, from Civil Society Europe, from all of the major umbrella organizations, or even the smaller organizations. We really need to find a way to get into social partnership and get the sort of recognition that the social partners get in terms of funding, in terms of support, in terms of all sorts of resources. And I think we have to ask that question. And I'm really, from Grouptree, we're trying to put forward an idea which may or may not succeed, but I'm hoping the large organizations and others will at least listen to it. It is this: can we organize in an informal way? I don't want to build a new executive or a new structure or a new funding thing that has to be sustained. You know, I'm talking about bringing together a network of the willing, and I mean willing, who are interested in coming together in an informal way, who can manage it through, you know, taking their turns in organizing the secretariats maybe every 6 months, and come to and produce work, first of all, on agreed positions, whether it's on migration or civil rights or whatever the subject, it doesn't matter. And allow those who disagree with that to opt out or opt in as they feel. In other words, it doesn't bind. And gradually, if you do that for a while, you do two things. First of all, even if you're not very fond of each other, and sometimes we have our friends and we have our less than friends, it puts us in a place where we actually talk to each other, we live with our disagreements, we manage our disagreements. We're not bound by any decisions we make, but we give a strong message to the governments, to the EU Commission. This network is real. It comes up with positions on a range of situations that exist. And bottom line, we are, as a network, campaigning for recognition as a civil partner, proper civil partner, not some kind of in the side door apology to be made, etc. We are there as of right, because, and I'm coming to the end, and I know Moritz, you'll be kicking me off in a moment, but during COVID, and we held a conference on March the 12th, and we demonstrated in a study in no uncertain terms, were it not for civil society organizations in the very early part of COVID, the whole fabric of our society would have been in serious trouble. The organized governmental, regional governmental could not cope with the needs of people suddenly on lockdown, suddenly needing help. And it was civil society organizations that came to the rescue. And my argument is we have to build on that, and we have to aim and argue the case that we shouldn't have low incomes. We shouldn't be, you know, having people who are, you know, with very good education, working without pensions often, without any supports, without any proper wages, with no job security. I think that day is gone, but we have a bit of work to do ourselves and to do that. So finally, I'm really pleased with organizations like Civil Society Europe and many others who are at least listening to that proposal, and I hope people connected to this will listen to as well. Sorry for going on. Thank you for that for the moment.
Yeah, thank you so much. I tried to take some notes, and yeah, I mean, there's so many elements. I think one of the elements that I think most of us, at least here, the 5 of us on the screen right now, come from a relatively privileged position as people working in, from the UK, Germany, US, where like our kind of civil space is more or less a given. Like I grew up in a family where I knew that civil society was a job, not something that you volunteer for. So, and even in our backgrounds, you said it, Seamus, about the rural-urban divide, where like there's like that's where democracy is under threat even in our countries. And I think and these are elements where, sorry, where, yeah, as I said, even our countries are struggling, and we have issues like measurement, like how many kilos of democracy do you get for an Erasmus Plus project, right? Like there's like this idea of expectation management from to everybody involved, I think is a very crucial one. And we see that things like the SURF program has been moved from the educational sector, from the educational executive agency to rights and justice, which tells us something about the shrinking social space and the shrinking space as of democracy and for civil society as guarantors of democracy. So I don't know, I could give another 15-20 minute speech, but I think like we're all in agreement with a certain set of frustrations. So maybe I'll give it back to the group with just the question of what can we do? Because like, can we write another set of recommendations? Like, are we going on a strike? Like, what are the options here? Because we know like there's great efforts done in Brussels, there's great efforts being done outside of it. I think everybody agrees that there needs to be awareness raising of the value of civil society, and not just talk to the politicians, but also talk to the people who vote for the politicians. Because then, you know, maybe we can get some allies into higher places. So what do we do now? What now? And Katja, if you want to jump in at any second, please do. And let's do this on a voluntary basis, shall we? I'd go for the panelists first, but I think we can, yeah, we'll open it to the general discussion in a second.
Okay, so I don't, okay, Una, you want to go first? We keep the same order?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it, Una.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Sorry.
First of all, I should say that I no longer live in the UK for obvious reasons. And I'm much more, in the last 2 years, I've been much more focused on the European aspect of all of this than the UK aspect. Seamus, I think it's a great idea. I think one of the things that's held us back in the past is what you highlighted, is this idea of trying to get everybody to agree. And we never, you know, even within civil society Europe, we never will all agree on certain things. I think the point you make about the big organisations, who sometimes I feel in the face of it say, yeah, we want to be part of that little club that you've formed. But guess what? If there's something that we particularly want to lobby about that doesn't, you know, isn't part of your work, then we'll go off and do that ourselves because we've got the clout to do that. And I think creating something that's very informal, that actually agrees positions on different things, politically as well, because I think one of the things that certainly I often felt this in the UK when I was working there, that people were actually frightened to be political. And when you did say something quite political, at one big conference I said, actually, there isn't this business of we're taking away jobs from the public sector. No, we're not. Because these jobs don't exist. Since 2008, these jobs have never existed, won't exist anymore. And if we actually want to help to give people the kind of support they need, then volunteering organisations or civil society organisations have to step in. So it's not a case of taking jobs away from the public sector. And that caused huge controversy, you know, because it was such a political thing to say at the time. But I think we have to be quite brave about being political, and just take up positions. One, I think this is going to be published actually in the ESC newsletter this week. One of the volunteers from the UK organisation I used to work for, has written a very political piece about migrants, and she's a volunteer who supports young migrants, and it's a very political article about how the state in the UK is just failing these young people completely, and how resourceful they are, and the kinds of skills and resources and resilience they've had to bring to their journey to the UK. And then they get there and it's almost as if, well, who cares? They don't exist. And that's political, and I think it's great that she's written that and that it's going to be published on a European level rather than just something in the UK. So I'd certainly, in terms of Volunteer Europe, I can only really speak for Volunteer Europe because I can't speak for other organisations. I think it would be fair to say we'd certainly be behind that kind of initiative. I think your point about being a proper social partner, I think, Sasha, you'd agree with that as well. You've been advocating for that for years and years and years, that we should be up there with the other social partners. We shouldn't be a kind of second-class citizen, as you said, Seamus, trying to get in the back door. You know, can you get a meeting with the commission, with the commissioner? Well, maybe, you know, if you try very hard, if you keep phoning up, you know, it's that kind of thing. And to an extent, it's sometimes the same at national level. You know, if you try to get a meeting with a minister, you know, the unions would get in, the employers' organisation would get in. But I used to be in the local authority sector in the UK. Yeah, it's easy to get in if you're LGA or you're COSLA, but is it easy to get in when you're an organisation that's a civil society organisation trying to do a particular job? No, it's difficult. So yeah, I think, I mean, the UK is irrelevant now, as we all know, but in terms of a European level, I think it's a great suggestion, and we'd certainly be right behind it. Thank you.
Okay, shall I go ahead?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I agree, of course, with everything that Una said, and just trying to structure in a different way some action points. First of all, to start with the horizontal issue of us being in competition or cooperating with each other, or keeping us working on issues, or whether we need to build convergences and how to do this. I think that in the face of this quite new phenomenon, at least for Europe, of shrinking civic space, I think that civil society, both nationally, locally, but also transnationally, more and more sees the value of working together, despite some reasons that can put still civil society in competition for resources. So more and more, I think there's alliance building at all these levels, and this can bring us stronger, facing in the same time constituencies and citizens, because in a lot of countries, public governments are playing this main role of pinpointing civil society as the enemy of the people. So in a few countries, we really needed to work hard, and with campaigns that we call Civic Pride, to build civic pride and to build the public image, and to help organizations to build their public image in face of the constituencies, because more and more nationally and locally, we see a strange situation where organizations that work for vulnerable groups are put in competition with organizations that work for locals. And I think that there's need for also, first of all, awareness raising inside of the sector, to realize that it's not because we work for migrants' rights, LGBT rights, that we would not be against poverty in general, and to be open to the way that these different issues intersect. And I think also that this is happening. A lot of intersectional work and alliance building across sectors and issues is happening already. So this is a positive step, I would see, and I would encourage us to go in that direction. Also, more and more at the European level, but also nationally, organizations join forces in formal structures that work on transversal issues, like Civil Society Europe does, and Civil Society Europe kind of structures exist in a lot of European countries. Then on the issue of recognition, us being recognized by public institutions, Seamus pointed towards a very, very important aspect that I would even say it in more tragic terms. I think that we are living times currently where institutions at all levels, national, but also European, they glorify the individual in its activist form. And as far as individuals would get together, join in associations and build collective power and collective ambitions and objectives, they would be contaminated somehow by, we don't know, ideologies or something that would be dirty, something that would be assimilated with political. And given that there's a growing mistrust in political environments, in political parties, and in political representations, also civil society organizations, but also trade unions are more and more seen as being part of this whole crisis of representation. While this can be true, and of course, all of us, I think, are open to self-criticism and to look into how do we reproduce these models of representations and together with their shortcomings. But I think that we should be very careful not to fall into this trap. No later than yesterday, there was a discussion in a plenary meeting of the liaison group, the ESC liaison group, where we had somebody from the European Commission presenting this competence center for participatory democracy, where they very much focus on how to build the competencies merely of the European civil servants to engage with individuals in policy making, which is a good thing in itself. We would not be against direct participation of citizens into policy making. But it was so worrying to see that nothing is to be explored on how to better reinforce consultation and dialogue mechanisms with organized civil society, which really lacks structure and regularity. And how can we build civil dialogue alongside the social dialogue? And when I asked the question to the person that was doing the presentation, she gave me exactly the answer that I mentioned, that organizations are somehow suffering from this distrust that goes along with representation, and individuals would be, you know, pure and genuinely not influenced by any kind of ultimately political vision, which I find very dangerous and fuels actually the regressive and anti-democratic and anti-rights narratives that are offered by the illiberal strongmen across Europe. So then it brings me to the point that I think there's no other way than to join forces and cooperate around this point that we have in common, that we need ourselves to get recognized by the institutions, and we need to get recognized as institutionalized forces, as independent forces, as organized civil society. So we already, I think, started or set the first building blocks of this cooperation between Civil Society Europe and the ESC Grouptree. Also inside our own civil society outside the institutions ranks, we started to cooperate with the trade unions. And I must say that in the past, we were facing quite some tensions. Us, civil society, seeing the social partners in a privileged driving seat, and social partners seeing a danger with NGOs participating in social, or even being preferred by institutions to enter into social dialogue, sidelining social partners, which have their own legitimacy based on representation, etc., etc. So I think that in the situation where our participation in the Conference for the Future of Europe is very weak and sidelined, this also contributed to raise awareness in our own inside our own organizations. And I think it helped us to work better together, both with trade unions and among all different components of organized civil society in all our diversities. So I would second very much this. It is happening formally inside ESC. It is happening formally inside Civil Society Europe. And if it can happen even informally between our different structures, then I could only encourage this to happen.
Seamus,
yeah, thanks. Well, again, I try not to be as long as the last time. I mean, I would completely support Alexandrina in pretty much everything she's just said in terms of the way forward. And she's right that discussion at the liaison group was very, very worrying and very, very annoying at the same time. And I only met Brikena yesterday of the liaison group, and we're along with many others, we're trying to say, right, we can't, we have to change things. We have to change the image that seems to be there, or we have to present a clear message to those who are making these decisions about us, around us, and many times against us, that you can't just do that and offend hundreds and thousands of civil society organizations across Europe and everywhere else. We have to present that kind of front. And as I said in my proposal, and it's the proposal within the ESC, we're really hoping for more support on, is we don't set up a binding sort of network that you have to, you have to completely salute to and kowtow to. You are allowed and should be allowed to have your own viewpoints and to have your own independence. And that's why it should never be a kind of a structured body. But working with the ESC, with the liaison group, with Civil Society Europe, with so many other groups, the governments and the Commission need to understand that excluding us has a price. I think, Moritz, you talked about going on strike. I've seen that happening here in Ireland, and frankly, nobody cares, nobody notices, and it doesn't seem to have the desired effect. But what they do, what does have the desired effect is if we begin to articulate positions that are broadly in line with what I think citizen panels are saying at the Conference of the Future of Europe, then we will be listened to, and gradually we'll build up a focus and a group. But I think at every opportunity we get, in every forum, we have got to say civil society cannot be ignored, because we are being ignored. And it's political, it's deliberate, and it's quite undermining. And yet I in Strasbourg recently at the Conference of the Future of Europe, and those of you who are there, you will have heard it, I discovered citizens panels were actually saying the same thing as many organizations around Europe are saying right now. They're saying it. So there's nothing different coming from the citizens panels. The difference, of course, is from a commission, from a governmental perspective, they're easier managed. You disband them and you send them home, and you don't have to listen to them anymore. Whereas you can't do that with civil society organizations, and that's a problem for them. So I'm really saying we need to continue this dialogue and build on it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Again, Katja.
I think Niels actually had a comment before I wanted to.
This is why I would open it up to the audience as well, because I think then I would hand over to Niels if you still want to say, and then I think everybody else is also cordially invited to jump in with questions. Then we can collect a few, and then the panel can react.
Thank you to your reflections and remarks. So my intention, I was triggered by Alexandra Naimovic, and the one thing which came into my mind is that there are also double standards inside of non-profits and of civil society. So it cannot be that the big players of the civil society, of the non-profit sector, are having double standards for themselves and for the projects that they are funding. I see there some developments that the most worrisome neoliberalism is over, probably. I experienced it when I started to work in the volunteerism. And so in the discussion yesterday about digitalization, we talked about that it would be a task for civil society and for education to enforce the following of standards. So when Sergei Lagodinsky is enforcing something about the rights of civil society, the free space, there's a lack probably for this, what is a fair payment and salary and a fair working condition in Europe. And here I would say we should reach out to those that are already there. If we like them or they like us or not, the trade unions, I mean, they are the fact, they are the partners. From my perspective, I started to implement a working council in Germany 2 times it was even not the leadership of the NGO which was against it. 2 times it was in favor of it. But I felt that in the trade unions, they were not really interested. A small NGO with only 2 people out of 15 organized in a trade union. So it's much work, and you don't know if it has an impact for the trade-off for the trade union. But on the other hand, I felt also among the people inside of the NGOs a little bit, let's say this, I want to ask if not this working for the good is for many people connected to this libertarian idea. So against organizations, against social structures, feeling themselves as the as the standard that has to be set. So this kind of individualism. So in this sense, I would see we have to talk with people inside of NGOs and also with NGO leaderships about standards. And last but not least, inside of my sector, education, I feel always when I go to trade unions, I'm not taken for serious because I'm not teacher in a formal system. All 50% of teachers are organized. All of these people in the non-formal education are not. So I'm not playing a role there. And that does something for me, with me. So I'm not going to union meetings. Also, I am a union member since 10 years. So, but yeah, still I would say we need to see them as the partners, but we should also enforce in our sector the kind of standard definition for fair payment.
Yeah, thank you, Niels. I think like this also like factors back quite nicely with our Unsung Hero Dialogues project, because we did have an autumn school last year, which was an adventure in and of itself in the middle of a pandemic. But like one of the outcomes of that was a change.org campaign, or at least a pledge for fair hiring practices, fair and transparent hiring practices within civil society organizations. Because as much as we have to talk to other people about, you know, giving us the funds, we also have to practice what we preach ourselves, and that's very often, I think, in difficult economic situations where we're either personal, like even the leadership is forced to volunteer at least part of the time, where people can get paid as project managers but not as board members, things like that. But yeah, this idea of practicing what we preach is definitely an important element that we also need to face and that we need to be realistic about and admit. The panel, please jump in. We don't have to keep the structure of alphabet or as we had it.
Yeah, I'll just jump in to say that in terms of recruitment practices, I think civil society organisations or voluntary organisations or NGOs or whatever you want to call them across Europe need to be under the same legal responsibilities as anybody else in terms of recruiting. So it has to be, you know, transparent, fair, all of these things. And really, I mean, that is a question of the leadership of these organisations, whether it's at a national level or a European level, describing and implementing these standards. The same kind of goes for pay, because usually depends on the size of the organisation, the pay structure is linked to something else. So often, certainly in the UK, the pay structure is linked to the local authority pay structure, just because it's a standard that you can apply and you can make reasonable comparisons with the kinds of positions and jobs. But I mean, that how you actually apply that kind of thing across Europe is quite problematic. But certainly in terms of recruitment practices, I think everybody who works in a civil society organisation knows in their own mind what the proper standards are. and it's a question of the leadership applying these. I mean, I take your point about Niels, about trade union membership, but again, I mean that's another leadership issue, isn't it? Because if the leaders of CSOs encourage trade union membership and actually it's not just encourage it. I mean, you can't, as a chief executive or a director, secretary general, whatever, just say, guys, you know, if you'd like to be in a trade union, you can be. You've got to actually make a real point of having a union rep there in your organisation who will promote the trade union and the benefits of being in the trade union. You know, that's how it works. It's not by some kind of, you know, process of osmosis that everybody will join a trade union. So it does. I mean, I guess I would say this, but I do think it's the leadership of these organisations and generally the leadership across Europe that needs to promote that kind of thing properly, not just in a kind of, you know, as I say, a kind of informal, well, you can do it if you like sort of idea. And maybe it's up to every individual. It's not, you know, we don't want to make it compulsory, but if it's really promoted properly, then more and more people will join.
I had a question too. If I don't want to jump in, if others on the panel wanted to respond to Niels, but mine kind of comes back to the two of you mentioned this kind of started as a result of the 2008 economic crisis. And of course, we're now experiencing another crisis. And so I think, and we're still kind of in the midst of it and haven't really emerged enough to see how this is going to impact civil society fully in the years to come. And I also think it's kind of coupled with a reimagining of our relationship with work. And I think that's happening to different extents in different countries and at different levels. But I wonder too, you know, at the very personal level of how people are kind of reimagining the way we work in the future, how that interacts with our other life responsibilities, and also this more macro economic impact of the crisis. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on how that plays out in the next few years in relation to the topic of civil society, professionalization, acknowledgement, and then also individual workers' rights.
Maybe I can jump in, given that I was silent, not because I didn't want to answer to Niels' question. It's true that I didn't necessarily understand all the points, and but it links now also to the question that you posed. I think that, well, in principle, civil society is values-driven, mission-driven. So in principle, we should be different from the for-profit environments and including in working conditions. And then probably it's a matter also of scale, of size of organizations, because I can easily see how very big, hierarchically organized international organizations reproduce the same kind of shortcomings that we see in any kind of for-profit business models. So probably it's simply a matter of organization size and disconnection or connection with the base. And what levels do we have to connect or to disconnect with the base? But so probably small organizations that struggle to maintain offices, by definition, in working environments, they are also very close between, you know, leadership and employees, and so on and so forth. But also this comes with another shortcoming, the fact that we are experiencing, for example, in my own organization, and I'm sure we are not the only ones. Given the few resources that we have and the big ambitions that we all have, and the big success that is making us strive even more, we tend to neglect all those administrative structures that a normal organization would put in place to take care, you know, to formalize the well-being of us all, human resources and everything. This falls quite often on the shoulders of the leadership, who then, I mean, cannot even find time to put in on our own agenda a thing such as when I was mentioning to bring a unionist in the office and to incite and to explain people, simply because, you know, it never gets on your to-do list because of the multitude. So I think that there are shortcomings, and this double standard should be, of course, dealt with. But I guess that in our environments, at least there's goodwill. Of course, this is not enough. And I would encourage us all to give up a little bit on our ambitions, and to look how we can reinforce each other and take care of each other and of our staff and volunteers to be more effective in changing the world. So also looking at these nitty-gritty aspects that are administrative issues. I'm not saying to hire a well-being chief manager that would force people to team build and so on and so forth, because I think this is happening naturally in our environments, but to strike the balance between our ambitions and how we better organize our means to ensure the well-being of us all and to avoid burnout. Thank you.
I think it's a really interesting question, Katja, because it has kind of two sides, isn't it? I mean, I used to say to people all the time, look, I'm not really interested in where you do your job or when you do your job. I'm interested in the outcomes you achieve in your job. And if you choose to do these because it suits you between 8 and 10 at night, and that suits the business as well, then you go ahead and do them between 8 and 10 at night. There's got to be a balance of the needs of the business and the needs of the individual. And the COVID pandemic has sent us into a kind of spin around this, because on the one hand, all of a sudden people could work at home, had to work at home. So there was none of this presentism anymore because you couldn't be present in the office. So from what, on the one hand, that was a great thing, because it did free people up to have much more flexibility in terms of their work-life balance. On the other hand, for people who have caring responsibilities, it has, or don't live in circumstances where it's easy to have a kind of office at home, it's made it very difficult for them to be able to have that work-life balance, because they've maybe got small children there, or they're caring for elderly relatives, or they don't have a home office, for example, which that's not exactly the norm. So it has given us this kind of quandary, hasn't it? That in some ways it's been a great thing. It's freed people up to work in a different way. On the other hand, it's perhaps given some more tensions in that I think as leaders of organisations, we really have to think about. And I agree with you, Sasha. I mean, you can't put a wellbeing manager into organisations that have got 6 people. But I suppose there are lots of resources that you can direct people to. There are lots of ways, informal ways that people can support one another if they're feeling that things are getting on top of them. Or they're finding that work is just too much, and I think as a sector, we need to think much more about that, because we won't have the resources that, say, the big corporates have. But as a sector, we do have lots of resources. We have lots of personal resources that we could bring to bear. So it's a really interesting dynamic, I think.
Yeah, Seamus.
Yeah, just quickly, I think the 2 things. First of all, in Ireland anyway, I can only speak for Ireland in terms of the COVID and the working from home. Funny enough, civil society organizations did very well because they moved faster, they quickly set up themselves, and they really did a good job. So I think there is something there, Katja, in how we would develop that. I suppose the second thing in terms of how we work is there's very little, and I think there's very little research in how we could do a better job, or how we could manage particularly workers who are on low pay, which they shouldn't be, but in such a way that at least their work-life balance could be better improved. And we haven't done that research, and maybe you can help me with, there's not too many organizations doing that kind of research.
Yeah, I mean, like that last part is, I mean, like we're nearing the end of our 90 minutes. but this is, I don't think, like, yes, like we did our little survey here, but one of the reasons why we included that in a larger project was because there was next to no research into the economic situation of either on the organizational or on the individual level, which of course then hampers like the ability to lobby essentially for our positions if there's no data to support it. And I think like I hope that we won't be the only ones in the future to try to like not necessarily mitigate that fact, but like try to add at least some data to the mix, because again, like if there's a survey that I missed, but there aren't many that can help support making those cases. And then also like correlate civil society activity with like anti-democratic tendencies and like into the shrinking social space. So I think that there's a lot of very interesting questions that should be asked through surveys and through representative surveys. So, and yeah, and that goes, yeah, the whole range from the people who are either employees or freelancers to the people who are volunteers because they have to be, because it's the only way they can, you know, participate in civil society, although they're probably highly qualified, and we saw the level of education in the sector, and you know, so many elements that should say, like, if this were any other sector, the average pay would be probably twice, if not thrice as high. Yeah, I mean, we are at, yeah, okay, we're technically 2 minutes over. I would maybe ask like for one more round, like not famous last words, but like some maybe concluding remarks, if you have them. Yeah.
I'm just very briefly, Moritz. Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to participate. I think it's been a really interesting and fruitful discussion. I do think it's a great report. I have to confess, I've only read the 69 pages, not the whole thing, but it raises lots and lots of interesting possibilities for further research, for further European projects. I hope that you can stay together and perhaps make some applications for money to do some of that research, because it would be really helpful to the sector. So yeah, I don't really have anything more to add other than thanks very much for the opportunity, and congratulations again on the report, and more power to your arm, as we say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, again, congratulations for the work and for the report. I think it is very much needed, and I would be very happy to stay connected if you want to put in place this task force of people to think about how can we improve practices. Well, first of all, in our own courtyard, and then how can we better do advocacy to claim our rights and recognition for the work we do. But in the first place, I would be very interested to stay on board to work further on how we improve working conditions in our environment, and how we commonly agree standards, maybe by comparing them from one country to another, and adopting a model that could suit us all and the people that we work with. So I'm very motivated by this. Of course, it would be an add-on, unforeseen on my own to-do list and agenda, but I think it's needed.
Me too. I'm in a happy position that I can do it on a voluntary basis.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can still hear me. My computer keeps telling me sometimes the internet connection is poor. Look, my only final words is that, you know, we need to frankly work very hard in making sure we send a very singular message to governments and everybody else that we should not be ignored. We need to equally work very hard to ensure that the bigger organizations do not crowd out the smaller ones, that they give them space, and that they allow them the assurance that you can be part of this, I call it informal network, for the betterment of everybody's future. Because frankly, the way government and the way politics are going around the world, and even in Europe, if you look at Poland and Hungary and other countries, I'm very, very worried about the way they're going and the effects they're going to have on civil society. So I think civil society organizations have a major task urgently to take up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us for those 90-odd minutes. I think we'll be in touch with any follow-up ideas that we have. And I think this is definitely something that we're all committed to. And yeah, this is, you'll keep hearing from us. Maybe, you know, if you don't, check your spam folder. But yeah, no, thank you so much. Also, thank you for the opportunity to Andrea and Lifelong Learning that we could have this panel, and for all the support. That was, yeah, very comfortable to work with. And yeah, I know I'll hand over the very last words to Katja.
I thought you were speaking for me. You did such a good job. No, I just thank you to everyone for joining in LLP and then our 3 panelists, and look forward to keeping up the work on this.
Yeah, and I think that to anyone who wants to reach out, please do so. I think we're comparatively easily findable. And yeah, so happy to respond, happy to collaborate. Of course, more volunteering is more better. Know that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Goodbye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.